Welcome to the M1 Fitness Podcast. Today I'm pumped to have Katherine Lewis on the show. Katherine is an award-winning journalist, author, and speaker, and we're chatting all about her book, The Good News About Bad Behavior, Why Kids Are Less Disciplined Than Ever, and What to Do About It. Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you. Now, you actually had graduated from Harvard with a bachelor's degree in physics. So I'd love to hear a bit about the evolution of your career to date. Can you share a bit about that with us?
Sure. Well, I should preface that by saying my mother is from Singapore. And so math was a very important part of my childhood. And, they sort of in those early years said, you're good at math, you're good at science. And those were fields that I loved. And I found so fascinating to do the lab work at the beginning of a semester, beginning of a summer internship. And then by the end, 2 or 3 months in, I was kind of done. I wanted to learn something new. So I didn't quite figure that out until my senior year of college. And so I realized I wasn't going to be a physicist and thought about what else I might want to do. And I had been on my high school paper. I loved writing. I loved learning new things. So I figured I'd just give it a try, and was lucky enough to get a job right out of college in a daily newspaper called The Bond Buyer, covering Wall Street and writing about state and local government, finance, the municipal bond market, derivatives. So I got to use some of that math in those fields, and just really loved the immediacy of journalism, where you talk to someone, you find a story, you write it down, and the next day it's in the paper. So from there, they moved me down to D.C. to cover Congress, the Supreme Court, the federal agencies here. And I did that for a little while, worked for Bloomberg News, sort of same idea, covering policy, banking policy, derivatives and commodity policy, some media and technology, which was a really fun set of areas. But at a certain point, I just got tired of the daily news business, where you're just sort of chasing the next headline, trying to beat Dow Jones by 10 minutes, and wanted to do something that was a little bit more long-term. So I got a job working for Newhouse News Service as a national correspondent, writing about money, work, and family. And that was so much fun, writing about what the pocketbook issues that really matter to people, some news analysis, some feature writing. And from there, just really got interested in the family side of it. Had my own kids along the way, and more started writing about children, about education and parenting, child development, psychology. So by the time Newhouse closed their bureau in 2008, I was really ready to try something totally new. And at that point, I launched my own freelance writing practice. It's actually been 10 years since that.
November. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been independently employed for 10 years and really love being my own boss and writing in that nexus of topics I'm interested in that someone will pay me to write about. And the big breakthrough for me happened when Mother Jones magazine published a story I wrote about child discipline and discipline in schools, and that went viral, became the most read story the magazine had ever published. And from there, got a book contract and wrote The Good News About Bad Behavior. So it's been a really exciting ride, and so grateful to all the editors and obviously the parents and teachers who shared their stories with me to make the book possible.
That's awesome. Now, before we get into the book specifically, what originally inspired you to write about parenting and child's behavior to begin with?
Oh, truly just trying to understand these crazy little creatures in my home. I had, as I mentioned, I was raised by very high achieving, very rule-oriented parents, and I was a good girl. I always got, good grades and did what I was told, and somehow my children did not get the memo. they were following a totally different narrative. So I was trying to understand them and just interviewing more and more psychologists, child behavior experts, educators, to try to understand them and how to be the best parent I could for them. And then the more that I talked to people, the more I realized I was not the only parent trying to figure out what was going on with kids today. And there really was this widespread problem of children not doing what they were told and really struggling to manage their behavior, thoughts, and emotions.
Right. Now, I really like a quote of yours that I came across, and it's that our role as parents isn't to preside over an always peaceful household. It's to see disruptions as a chance to better understand our children and help them grow. The home is a learning lab where our children can experiment, fail, and eventually succeed, not a shrine to perfection. So I can see how this ties in with the title of the book as far as, looking at quote unquote bad behavior as more of an opportunity or feedback as opposed to something that simply just needs to stop. So am I on the right track there?
Yes, exactly. It's the kids who you don't ever hear a peep from that we should be concerned about. So when your kid's acting up, they're not following the script, that's a great signal to you that something's needed. And it's not a sign that you did something wrong, that your child's going to be living in a van down by the river in 10 years, or, that's actually what happens. That is how childhood works, is the kids mess up, they act up, they can't seem to do the right thing in the situation that's needed. And that's your signal that, hey, great, there's something needed here. Let's be on the team together to figure out how to help you do what's needed in the situation.
Love that perspective. Now, would you say that kids' behavior is actually worse now than before? And if so, what are the primary drivers at play here in your eyes?
Yeah, so I firmly believe that even though it's this trope, the kids today are the worst, that truly kids in 2018 really are having more difficulty managing their behavior, thoughts, and emotions than ever before. And we see this in the rising suicide rate that has doubled in the last decade for children 10 to 14 years old, and it's gone up 41% for kids 15 to 19 years old. And anyone who has young adults in their lives or young adult friends knows it's a big problem in the 20-something era as well. So there is something going on that's just making it more challenging. And so kids do need more support. They need a whole new set of tools and strategies from their parents, from educators in their lives in order to succeed and to thrive. And it's really hard to prove what's going on or why, but I think the suicide statistics are very compelling. And the National Institutes of Health numbers on the level of behavioral disorders is very compelling. Huge study of more than 10,000 children, representative sample of the US, found that 1 in 2 will have a mood or behavioral disorder by the time they're 18. So to me, that's just irrefutable, that there's something really significant going on. 1 in 2 kids in your child's preschool class, by the time they graduate from high school, are going to have a pretty major challenge that's not like a deficit or a flaw or something that they're broken, right? It's just their own unique makeup and something that they're going to have to figure out with their parents' and teachers' support how to manage in their life to get the best out of themselves. And in my book, I argue there are 3 big factors that have changed in our society that in research labs are also correlated with rising anxiety, depression, attention disorders, and substance use. And those are, number 1, the disappearance of childhood play, which is such an integral part of children learning to manage themselves. Number 2 is just the growth of social media, mass media, how technology infuses our lives, which offers so many opportunities, but also presents a huge challenge for us to regulate it and to manage our feelings of anxiety, depression, narcissism that stem from this broader landscape that we're all operating on. And number 3 is that kids are unemployed. They don't have household jobs. They often don't have after-school jobs. Their childhood is about achievement and performance as opposed to contribution, as opposed to helping watch a younger sibling, helping get dinner on the table, do the things for the people that you love that give you that immediate feedback of positivity that you're doing something meaningful. Instead, we ask our kids to get an A and then get an A on the next test, and to be the star on the soccer field and be the best artist, and all these wonderful goals, which are really valid, but they can't be the only thing that defines our kids.
Right, and I'd love to double click on some of those. So as far as the play aspect goes, my sister is an elementary school teacher, and we tend to see the sort of elimination of the physical activity or just the slowly scaling back of that And then not only can that be detrimental because the kids aren't able to blow off as much steam or energy, but then the school day hasn't gotten shorter, so they're actually forced to sit even more or be still even more. So how do we navigate that? Like, it's just a massive factor, and obviously play factors in there.
Right. So in schools, I think schools are really recognizing this. And as I've traveled for the book and talked to school communities, I feel like they're the most receptive to this message because they see it. They're sort of on the front line seeing that children really need more physical activity than they're getting. So I see a lot of schools now having policies that you do not take away recess as a punishment. That's sort of this one crucial message we have to get across, that kids need that recess. They need sometimes 2 recesses a day, that teachers are incorporating movement breaks into the day. So even if it's 30-second jumping jacks or 1 minute dance to a Go Noodle video, more and more I see schools adding back in that physical activity that is so connected to how our minds work optimally. And I would say even younger than that, preschool is really where this all begins, or I mean, really, infancy is when it begins, and throughout their whole life, kids need just free play, unstructured play, opportunity to explore and learn, sometimes supported, by adults. But so in preschools also, we're seeing that more preschools notice that kids really do well when they're just playing pretend. That's how they learn abstract thought, when they're, associating an object with an idea. That's how they learn social cooperation. So I see more and more preschools also seeing the value of play-based learning, and that it's not about drilling numbers or letters or colors. It's about learning those things in context. And often the preschools have to sort of preach to the parents who want those sort of easy to see outcomes. And it's sometimes harder to understand how are children learning those important things when it looks like they're just playing with blocks or they're just digging in the mud, And so I think the more that we all just reinforce that this is how children learn, it's what they need, I think more and more parents will be able to still that sense of anxiety that, oh, Johnny across the street already can read and my kid doesn't even know their letters. And we all just need to fight back against that fear-based parenting in order to give our children what they truly need.
Right. Now, boys and girls are much more the same than they are different, obviously. But what does the research say about the differences and the ways in which we can capitalize on those differences in order to set kids up better from a behavior standpoint?
That's a great question. And I do agree that boys and girls are more similar than they are different. So I think there's a lot of overlap in their behaviors. And the most important thing is to understand the way that children sometimes are stereotyped, or even that they have different needs. So the stereotypical girl issue that you might see is this sort of well-behaved, very responsible, type A little girl who in first grade is worried about a B or worried about getting into college. And so those girls don't always present. We don't always see them as expressing anxiety. We see them as actually being orderly and well-mannered. And so we need to be aware and look out for those girls who may have a perfectionist streak, who may really have a lot of anxious feelings that they need help with. So the girls often in that sense fly under the radar. On the other hand, the girls who are rambunctious and noisy and loud sometimes get more punishment because of it in school settings or even in home settings because it's non-traditional girl behavior. So we need to also hold space for those girls who maybe are not that stereotypical good girl. When it comes to boys, we've had a lot of wonderful discussion about what boys need. There's great books out there, and there's more books coming that I know about that are coming out on the unique challenges of boys. And they are sort of the canary in the coal mine, because when boys need to run and play and they can't, they will act up. And so they're often the ones who are getting into trouble the most because they're the red flag. They're sort of not going along with the program of sitting longer in school and putting their pencil down and keeping their hands to themselves. So we need to recognize our boys need that active play. They need to learn through their own experience what the boundaries are for rough play with their peers. And they just need that sort of understanding and step-by-step guidance in order to get to where they need to be to succeed. I hope that answers the question. I kind of
Yeah,
went
that's
off on a lot
great.
of tangents.
No, that's great. I like the canary in the coal mine thing, because if we can use tactics like that to notice something, as soon as possible, that's ideal, and then, let things sort of flow from there. So that's really cool. Now, you state that things like yelling, timeout, sticker charts, etc. don't work. So what does the latest research tell us about how to motivate and encourage children?
That is such a great question, and I wish more people would ask it. The research on motivation is so interesting and powerful, and a lot of it began actually with adults when we think about self-determination theory and what adults need to thrive. Yes, I like being paid, but I also need a sense of autonomy. I need a sense of mastery over what I can do, and I need a sense that I'm connected to something bigger, that what I do matters. And the same holds true for children. They need to know that they have some control, some sense of control, that they're valued and that they belong. So we need to give those things to our kids by letting them chop, vegetables, even if the knife is sharp, and letting them go out in the backyard and play and dig and bike across the street and do all these things that maybe our fear would, prevent them from doing in another context. When it comes to motivating kids in school, that is just so hard. A lot of parents say to me, my kid doesn't care about the homework. How do I make him care? You cannot make another human being care. And a lot of homework, I'm sorry to say, is frankly useless. So I discovered this when my kids were in 3rd and 4th grade, and they came home with worksheets, and they did them they had sloppy handwriting. They didn't complete them. And to me, with my own, background as a student, I was horrified. And I said, you need to do better. You need to write neatly. What's your teacher going to say? And my child at one point said, look, the teacher doesn't even notice if I make a mistake. They do a check mark. It's busy work. And if your kid doesn't care and the teacher doesn't really care, you, the parent, cannot be the one who cares the most. So set up structures that accommodate homework in middle and elementary school, because it's not really that effective for furthering your child's learning. So often a good rule of thumb is 10 minutes per day per grade. So your 1st grader should sit down for 10 minutes, do whatever they're supposed to do, and then the book gets closed, it gets sent back to school, they face whatever consequences they face at school, and then it's really their business. In 5th grade, 50 minutes. And if your child's regularly coming home with a lot more homework than that, I would say advocate for your children in school, because the school often is just responding to the parents wanting to know that their kids are achieving. And you can find a more rational balance together. And for the broader sense of motivation, just follow your child's interests. If they're jumping off the furniture, maybe they want to do gymnastics or, engage in a tumbling class. If they really like digging in the mud, help them to garden or do an indoor garden, or, use the things that your children are intrinsically interested in to build on. And that may be kicking a soccer ball, but it may not. And we need to also have a broader range of successful activities that our kids can engage in, so that it's not just the traditional sort of soccer team, art class, engineering, where we as parents can feel like we see that connection to the future school and career success. We also need to just follow where their interests lead. Another author, Debbie Reber, just posted something about her son doing typesetting and calligraphy, because he's interested in it. And, it's wonderful that your children can have these very specific and detailed interests, and we just need to let them pursue them and support it.
Right. So let them kind of take the reins on that, and then, help them to get to where they want to be and experience those different things. That's really cool. Now, it seems to be pretty common for parents to either parent the way their parents did, or then flip the coin and do the complete opposite. So you encourage parents to find out more about themselves in order to essentially be in a better place to lead their children, because their kids are often different themselves. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that is exactly the two patterns that I see, where we need to parent the kids we actually have, and not just correct the mistakes from our childhood or what was missing, or maybe try to duplicate what we felt was successful. I think that's the hardest and most important task of parenting is to see the children you really have, love them, accept them, understand them unconditionally, and then go from there. Okay, so what are you going to need to succeed in the world? How can I help you with those skills, or those social skills or the life skills, so that you can be the best version of you? And so, yeah, I think it's helpful to understand what are some of the wounds that we're carrying that maybe we don't need to put on our own children. And in the literature, the child development literature, there's 3 types of parenting. Authoritarian, which is the sort of father knows best, my way or the highway, you do it because I said so, which is associated with poor outcomes in kids' mental health. Kids parented that way often have good grades, they stay out of trouble, but they may not have the best relationships with their parents and in adulthood, and they sometimes can really struggle with anxiety, depression, some of those challenges in adulthood, forming relationships. Permissive parenting is the opposite, where you want to be your child's best friend, you don't really have a lot of limits, and if anything, those outcomes are actually worse. So kids who are raised with a permissive parenting style may get into trouble, they may experiment with sex and drugs, really not achieve in school, and so those outcomes are even worse than authoritarian parents. The ideal well-supported parenting style is authoritative parenting, which has been defined for a couple decades now in the child development literature and is just starting to be understood in the neuroscience literature. Like, what does that actually look like inside a kid's brain when they experience authoritative parenting, which is clear and firm limits, but warmth, nurturing, and acceptance of the child's perspective in this. So you have family rules that you agree on. If the child gets bigger and suddenly they want a different limit, you might have a discussion about that and take their perspective into consideration. And the version of authoritative parenting in my book, I call the apprenticeship model. I looked at 4 different styles of discipline, 4 different models across the country, 2 in homes and 2 in schools, and tried to pull out the common threads of what makes them work, because I sort of think of it as authoritative parenting for this modern era, where it's not just enough to set the limits and expect our children to meet them. We really need to get a little bit more granular and identify the skills that they're missing and help to supplement them, and use this whole new set of tools that are very well studied, that have been used in schools and classrooms and in homes across the country really effectively. So just seeing what are the tools out there and how can I use them in my own home, and which ones of them work for my child.
That's great. Now, I genuinely believe that it's not a matter of if a parent will, kind of mess up their kids. It's a matter of to what degree, right? So you recommend that parents give up the quest to become the perfect parent. So can you share some of the benefits of making mistakes and how it can actually help the relationship between parents and children from a relating perspective?
Yes, I love this question. And I think that is often at the root of a lot of our parenting struggles, is the ideal parent we thought we should be. Whether that is the parent whose kid always shows up to school with their homework done and their backpack together and their face washed. Sometimes it's that version. Sometimes it's the perfectly patient, never loses their cool, always has enough energy. So whatever your version of perfect is, no, none of us is going to achieve it. And it's good for our kids to see us struggle, mess up, make amends, and try again. Because that's what we want them to do. How can we expect them to go through life, try hard, acknowledge their mistakes, try again, make amends, if we don't do it with them? So if they're this little child, 5 years old, 3 years old, 10 years old, and they look up at us and we are their whole world, no matter, even in those teen years, they look up to us as their model of adulthood. And if they see someone who is so perfect, they can never mess up, how do they imagine that glide path to get from being this messy, disorganized, chaotic little kid to being an adult? They have to see a version of adulthood that seems within reach. And so it's those 2 reasons, the modeling that we're doing to show them what it means to be in a respectful relationship where you acknowledge when you mess up and you make amends, and also to give them hope that they can get to adulthood and not have to suddenly become perfect, that their flawed humanity is okay.
Right. And I think that builds into the next question I had for you pretty perfectly. Can you elaborate on the concept of reflective listening and how it works?
Yes. And this is a great tool for kids, for your marriage, for your people you supervise at work, your boss. It's a 3-step process where so you don't always have to reflectively listen to your children. Sometimes you're just going to be saying, oh yeah, wow, what was the next thing that happened in your dream? Okay. But when you notice that there's something going on that your child really needs attention for, so it could be that they're sort of pulling at you and they have something from school they want to talk about, or they're very upset, that's a signal that you want to take a little time to really understand what's going on with them. So the first step is you ask them, invite what they're saying, what they want to say to you. So open-ended questions. The second step is to reflect back what you think you heard. And this is a really important step because it lets them hear in adult language what's going on. So it sounds like you were really left out at recess today when the other kids ran and played Gaga and you didn't want to, and so you were sitting by yourself in the sandbox. Is that what it was like for you? And that tentative phrasing and the asking for a correction or affirmation gives them a chance to refine further your understanding. No, I wasn't left out. I was mad because they're supposed to be my friends and they didn't even listen when I said I didn't want to play Gaga. So it continues the conversation. It helps the child to better understand their own experience, to process that, and it also gives them more feeling words. So it expands their emotional vocabulary. Little kids basically have like a mad, sad, glad vocabulary, and it gives them more nuanced words for all the different emotions they're feeling. And I would say the other thing that it helps with is it prevents us, who have been on this planet for many decades, who have lots of wisdom that we just want to implant in their brains. It prevents us from just jumping in and giving advice or feedback or criticism, because the value here is not the kid doing the right thing the next day at recess. The value is them processing, understanding their experience, and making a choice about how they're going to handle it in the future.
Yeah, I really like your approach as far as sort of empowering kids to be autonomous and, growing into actual adults one day and feeling empowered. That's really cool. Now, I've noticed that you've said the word signal a few times. So how do parents separate or just distinguish the signal from the noise?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think parenting is the ultimate growth opportunity, sort of personal growth opportunity, because it's such a challenging thing that you're in 24/7. So it's a path. You sort of start to get better at understanding your own self-regulation needs and tuning into your child. So part of it is making sure you're getting sleep, you're getting exercise, you're getting your adult relationships fed, so that you're not always just in service of this little creature. And that gives you the sort of cushion or the capacity to then be present and be available for your child. And I think as you sort of make sure that you are getting what you need, you get better at understanding your child and saying, okay, this is the same tantrum they've had for, 2 times a week for the last month. There's something going on here. If it's repeated, if it sort of presents itself over and over, that's something that is worth addressing. If it's an aberration and they were tired and, underfed or they needed a snack, then that's not as big of an issue to need to address. So I think getting more confidence as a parent sometimes just takes time, and sometimes giving yourself permission to not have to act right away is the best thing you can do, because a lot of us are biased for action. We want to jump in, do the right thing, fix the problem. but we also need reflection. So you can see something happen with your child and bookmark it and think about it. And then if it happens again, okay, yeah, that's something that we do need to address.
That's cool. And I think that's really valuable as far as how it ties into what I do around fitness and health and all that good stuff is like, man, you're going to be a way better parent if you're feeling and looking and performing your best. So set yourself up and put your own oxygen mask on first.
Oh, absolutely. And also that you're modeling for your child what balance and health looks like. So all of those things are so important.
That's really cool. Now, you obviously, I'm sure you learned a ton over the course of writing this book. So what are maybe 2 to 3 of the most valuable or profound things that you've taken away and actually implemented yourself as a parent?
Oh boy, it's a tough question. I feel like it just imbues my whole life. The first one I think is probably just that confidence that they're going to be okay, and a little patience that, they don't have to be perfect now. And I think for me, at least, this was my sort of axis that was really challenging for me, that seeing my kids mess up and immediately catastrophizing. They're always going to be disorganized. They're always going to do X. Giving myself just that confidence that, I'm sure they're going to grow, they're going to change. That gives them space to actually do it because I'm not on top of them micromanaging. So I would say that's probably the first most important one. And the second is I've tried to really just appreciate and find joy in the people that they are. And that's been such a blessing. Like, I'm getting emotional thinking about it because they are so different from I am. And yet we're so close and we're such good friends, even though I'm not a permissive parent. I just feel really blessed that I can have a relationship that's so rich, where they teach me things. They help me see new ways to look at the world. And so I've tried to just let go a little bit of the bedtime rigidity as they get older, especially. They're making things out of paper or creating secret treasure boxes. And even though it's bedtime, we have our structures, and they know if they, go too late, then they miss the cuddle, and that's okay. That's their choice. And I try to just really appreciate what's unique about my kids.
Wow, beautifully put. Now, is there anything that you'd like to mention that we haven't touched on before we start to wrap up here?
Thanks for asking that. The thing I didn't talk that much about is what the neuroscience has really started to show us about how closely we're connected with our kids. And as part of the book reporting, I actually took my daughter Ava with me, and we went to Columbia University to have my parenting judged.
Cool.
So not everyone would do that, but I really wanted to understand the inner workings of the neuroscience. And they're looking at all the ways that our bodies are sending signals to each other that we aren't even aware of. So they put us in a room together, had us just read magazines, and they were measuring our heart rates, our breathing, even our sweat response, the level of stress saliva, cortisol in our saliva. And they find that our breathing will start to synchronize and our heart rate start to synchronize within just a couple minutes of sitting together. So we're helping our kids to self-regulate, not even in that sort of explicit way of modeling, but in the physiological way that if we are calm, our heart rate is under control, our breathing is under control, our kids' physiology will mimic that. So that's just, to me, underlines how important all of this is, that we need to learn to regulate ourselves, to give ourselves what we need in that oxygen mask that you mentioned in order to give it to our kids. So I think the neuroscience piece of this is really fascinating, and it supports what the child development experts have known for decades about how our kids really need the connection with a trusted adult, communication about living or about the problem at hand, and then a focus on building their capability to thrive in life.
That's so cool. And it's awesome to be able to measure some of that stuff, because I think that, everybody or every family would attest to the fact that sort of everybody is going through the same thing or swimming through the same water in a family system. So the more and more we can kind of parse that stuff out, and how much one of us affects one another, would be incredible.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating.
Now, if folks want to learn more about you, Katherine, the book, your social media handles, all that good stuff, where can they find you?
Thank you for asking. KatherineRLewis.com is my website, and that's sort of the best one-stop shop for all the information about the book, my upcoming speaking events, that sort of thing. On Twitter, I'm Katherine Lewis. Instagram is Katherine Reynolds Lewis, and Facebook is Katherine R. Lewis. So unfortunately, I don't have uniform handles, but always love to connect with listeners and future readers, I hope, and would love to see people on social media.
Great. I'll link to all that stuff in the show notes. And thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Really great to connect with you and your listeners.
Likewise. All right, guys, I'll catch you on the next episode.